Hi, everyone. This is John Daly. I'm here with another episode of the Daly Express. Today, I have on a longtime conservative political analyst. He has a new book out called The New Axis of Evil. He's also the owner and publisher of the Strident Conservative, an online source of Christian constitutional conservative opinion that he describes as politically incorrect and always right. That's pretty impressive, David, always being right. But last but not least, he's also a fellow Coloradoan. How's it going? This is David Leach. How are you doing today, David?
Doing just great. Happy to be here. Thank you for the opportunity to spend some time together.
Yes, absolutely. I'm happy to have you as well. So you have spent a lot of time in the political arena, David. Can you tell people about your background and what got you into politics and political commentary?
Well, the Strident Conservative, stridentconservative.com, has been up since 2009. So I've been doing it for a little while. Excuse me. And the I was actually involved in it before then too. Our local newspaper. You said I'm a fellow Coloradan. I live up in the mountains in a small mountain town, and our local paper used to accept guest commentary. And so I would do some guest commentary, mostly on local issues, like back when we were dealing with the pine beetle epidemic, when Ritter was still in office as our governor, and that kind of thing. I wrote a lot of stuff because, as before the Green New Deal was the Green New Deal, Colorado was doing a lot of that kind of stuff. So I kind of got my feet wet there. But my wife and I used to have a morning routine over coffee. We lived in Frisco, Colorado at that time. We don't live there any longer. But and we were the back of my house, my yard bordered the property where the Starbucks was. So we would go grab a Starbucks every morning, and I'd usually just bring them back home. And the our routine would be that she would work. We had a great room style area where her desk was up there, and sit in my easy chair and I'd read the Denver Post or some other news publication, and I would just go, "Can you believe that?" I mean, I would just say that to myself, talking out loud, and she'd go, "Okay, what is it?" So I'd read her the article, and she'd say, "Well, what's wrong with that?" And so I'd say, "Don't you see that what this means?" And I'd kind of give her my analysis of what that little story or opinion piece was all about. And she goes, "You have some really good insight into politics. You should maybe be on the radio." And I said, "Well, radio back then we had Rush Limbaugh, and we still have people like Glenn Beck and those types already on radio." I said, "What could I contribute that they aren't already contributing?" And she said, "Well, you're a little different. You're a voice in the wilderness." And I was kind of shocked because I attended a men's event where uh, we were invited to ask ourselves, it was a Christian men's event, and we were invited to ask ourselves what name God might have for us after we realized what names we were given by life and all that kind of stuff, loser and that kind of thing. So I was given a name, and I was a little bummed because it didn't make sense to me at the time. But uh, when she said "your voice in the wilderness," I was shocked because the name I got at that conference was John the Baptist. That sounds a little weird, but hear me out here. John the Baptist. And it's like, oh, well, that now what she just said makes a lot of sense, because if you read in the Bible, John the Baptist was described as a voice crying out in the wilderness. And so it's like, okay, I guess maybe I am supposed to do this. So I worked at a local public radio station in our little community. There was a privately owned public radio station. I worked there for several years, got my feet wet, got to do some talk show type stuff, got to talk a little bit about politics, because public radio, all about NPR and what their slant is toward politics. So I got to be kind of like an opposing viewpoint on occasion. Right after an NPR show would broadcast, I would get to broadcast and kind of give a contrasting point of view. And so that led to starting the stridingconservative.com. And I kind of used those two things together, and ultimately that led to writing opportunities. I used to write before Donald Trump. I used to write a diary on redstate.com. I used to write occasionally for Glenn Beck's website, theblaze.com. And like I said, I'm not welcome at those places anymore because I'm not a big fan of Donald Trump. Um, and so, excuse me. And so but I was able to leverage that experience. I got a job at a big Denver radio talk station, a super station, 50,000 watt, covered up and down the Front Range, all the way up into Wyoming and all the way down into New Mexico. And I was able to use my writing to create. They invited me to do these daily 2 to 3 minute long commentaries, and so I do basically a synopsis of that day's article on my website. That led to guest hosting for some of their talk shows that they had, and then eventually that led to me kind of leaving that scenario and starting my own little podcast. Right now, I do a 2 minute daily podcast tied into my articles that is broadcast on terrestrial radio and then a podcast page on my website. So that's how I got to where I am today. That ultimately led the man who hired me when I worked for the radio station in Denver. Um, uh, that he gave me an endorsement in my book that we're going to be talking about here in a little bit. And so it was really kind of neat how it all worked out, because he was able to take my website experience and put that into radio, and then radio experience ended up making my website better. So uh, now I do what I do. So, but it all started over coffee, reading an article.
That's excellent. It's excellent. Yeah, it's I've heard your story from a number of Red State and Blazer writers actually. What in the era of Trump, but no, it's I'm glad that that it gave you some experience and it opened some opportunities elsewhere. That's great. I do want to talk to you about some current political topics in a minute, but first,
Sure.
you brought up your book. I would love to talk about your book, The New Axis of Evil. You say that there is a war against liberty in America waged by both Republican and Democratic leaders in government, and that we, the American people, are close to losing our constitutional republic.
Mhm.
That sounds pretty bad. David, can you expand that thesis and get into the meat of what your book is about?
Well, that is what the subtitle of the book is: exposing the bipartisan war on evil. It's Republicans and Democrats, and it's not just in Washington. As I say in the book, it's Republicans and Democrats in the media. It's Republicans and Democrats in our churches. There's this. I A portion of the book mentions George Bush's Axis of Evil speech right after 9/11, and he identified North Korea, Iraq, and Iran as this axis of evil, kind of a three-legged stool. And the number three was interesting to me because I thought at the time, hey, we have three branches of government, and we also have three pieces to the puzzle about society in general. We have politics, we have entertainment or the media, and then we have a lot of people have their faith, their religious background, their social issues and stuff, things of that nature. So um, it started out initially as just a book about how the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch weren't necessarily working together, but it seemed like the end result of a lot of things that were going on post 9/11 had to do with little bits and pieces and little ways of trying to take away a little bit of our liberties in the name of safety. 9/11 brought us the Patriot Act, for instance, and then a revised version of the Patriot Act, and then later we found out about NSA spying and that kind of thing as a result of the Patriot Act. And then recently we had COVID, and how a lot of the things that were learned during the Patriot Act, specifically things on how to track cell phones and things like that, were used to track people to make sure they were complying with vaccine or mask mandates and that kind of thing. So um, there was kind of like an evolution, and that's kind of what I try to talk about in the book. Is not I don't The book is a little more timeless than just 9/11. It launches from there, but it goes into past administrations. It goes back to FDR and how a lot of the things that were done under Obama and Biden were actually things that started under FDR, and then how a lot of the things that Bush and Trump have done was those are the past four presidents. I wrote an article, in fact, about the past four presidents and how they were all kind of teamed on the same team. And so that it started in government, but then some of these guys openly, like Biden in particular, during COVID, his misinformation campaign, that was basically a war on free speech. And then we get some of that same war on free speech from Donald Trump when he's always talking about fake news and how if it's a story that isn't favorable to him, then obviously it isn't true. And he's openly suing media outlets. I mean, it's just since his reelection, we've had big major media conglomerates settle huge millions and millions of dollars with him just to avoid having to try to defend themselves in court. And we have this little piecemeal attempt from government, but then it's endorsed in some ways by the media. And then of course, especially in the age of Trump, the churches in particular have become very enamored with ideas. I remember getting into it during COVID, for instance, with a gentleman who said that if I wasn't pro-vaccine, then I wasn't pro-life. And it was just like, where, how is that an apples to apples comparison? I mean, it didn't make sense to me. And so this axis now consists of not just the government and its three branches, but it consists of our government, the media, and our churches. And they are all kind of working, sometimes hand in hand, sometimes independently, but all of them working with the ultimate result of being okay with doing away with things like free speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly. They're okay with getting rid of most of the Bill of Rights, the Second Amendment. They're okay with that because it's best for society as a whole. And that's kind of the overarching theme. I go into much more detail, of course. I compare government, for example, to the Matrix at one point, the movie The Matrix. And you're quoted, in fact, in my book in a Trump chapter. You wrote a yeah, you wrote a piece. I didn't do the whole piece, but you made an observation about how people who were staunchly anti-Trump just suddenly flipped over and everything's hunky dory now. He is our savior, and so yeah, that's kind of where it's at. So and then it's not all just here's a reason why they're wrong and here's a reason why they're wrong, but there's also a lot of good advice, I think good advice, on some ways that we can tackle this and try to reclaim our liberty, our Christian constitutional conservative values, and which are foundational to liberty. There's a chapter in the book about that, and that we can do things locally. There's things we can do that will it won't happen overnight. We didn't get here in a day or two. This has been going on for decades and decades and decades, and so it's going to take some time to fight back. And hopefully, there's enough people to see that. I don't have any children, but my hope is that what I'm trying to do through my book and through my work at the Strident Conservative is make things better for the next generation. I would be remiss in my responsibility as an American citizen not to do what I can to make sure that what I know we're supposed to have is available to those who follow after me.
No, I think that's an excellent point. I mean, I think of our future generations all the time. When I'm writing about these things, a lot of people don't, sort of assume that people who write about politics do so for fame or for money. Most of us are getting famous or rich as people. It's because a lot of us genuinely care about the country.
That's
But
right.
you brought up working for when you wrote for Red State and the changes. I definitely have to catch up with that with the quote, my quote in your book. I got a feeling. I think I know which one that is. But as there was a change, 10 years ago. As a longtime conservative, David, I'm curious if you thought a decade ago that the Republican Party would end up where it's currently at. Just from my perspective, I used to volunteer for the GOP. I've written about this before. I
Mhm.
did, door knocking, fundraising. I led some caucuses. I served as a delegate a couple times at the Colorado State Assembly. I met a lot of fellow Republicans during that time.
Sure.
Grassroots people, not the political elite, not the establishment as we hear about, and there was definitely some ideological diversity among them. I'm sure you saw that as well. But
Sure.
nearly everyone I met during those experiences proudly identified as, a constitutional conservative, a small government conservative. That kind of representation just doesn't really seem to exist in today's GOP. It doesn't exist in the Democratic Party either, but it used to exist in the GOP. Or maybe a better way of putting it is that it doesn't really have a strong voice in today's GOP. So much of it is just about keeping Donald Trump happy. Do you think that once Trump is gone, and I don't think he'll be in office for another term after this, but I'm sure he'll try. But I do think he'll be gone at least from electoral consideration. But do you think there will be any kind of return to the former GOP that we were, much more? I'm guessing you were probably involved to some extent as well, but maybe I'm wrong. But do you see a return going back to that, or do you think we're going to be sort of stuck in this populist personality cult era for the foreseeable future?
Well, let me go back to your first question about whether I saw this 10 years or so ago. Actually, yeah. I First of all, I am no longer a Republican. In Colorado, my only option now is to be an independent. So
Me
I'm an
too.
independent. I'm a registered independent in Colorado. I don't have any party loyalties. But even during the Obama administration, I mean, obviously, it was fun to. I wrote a lot of satirical stuff back then when Obama was in office because it was fun to do and it was easy to do. But over time, I was beginning to see how even in the mid 2012 to 2014 era, John Boehner and Mitch McConnell just always not just endorsing Obama's yeah, Obama wants it, Obama gets it, that kind of thing, just to keep the peace. But they never did. Even then, they weren't doing the things that conservatives wanted them to do. They weren't doing things to try to reduce spending. They weren't doing things to try to reduce taxes. They weren't doing anything to try to limit the scope of government. In fact, Obama, of course, is post 9/11, and when he takes things like the Patriot Act and everything and tried to expound on them, and when he would attack the media and stuff like that, John Boehner would be all over it. I mean, it's just like there used to be a rule. You're aware of this, I'm sure, as a former Republican. But there used to be a rule in Washington that a Republican majority wouldn't pass legislation unless they had a majority of the majority. So, in other words, if you had 100 members, just using round numbers, if you had 100 Republicans, you had to have at least 51 of those Republicans say yes to something regardless of what the other side of the aisle was wanting to do, because that was an evidence supposedly that the party was sticking to its principles. But under Boehner, that rule disappeared. There were a lot of things that happened post 9/11, things to do with that eventually gave birth to the NSA spying scandal and things of that nature that Boehner could have stopped, but he never did. So, you got that during the Obama administration, but I was a Republican still then. I stopped being a Republican in 2015 when who rode down the golden escalator and let us all know that he was going to run for president. And it wasn't so much that he decided to run, it was how the Republican Party just abandoned everything to make sure that he would not only run, but that he would be president. Um, there was there was a rule change, for instance, after Romney lost in 2012 to Obama's reelection campaign. They changed the rules that basically did away with ways to try to make sure that the delegates that go to the convention were a numerical representation of how the vote went down. They did away with that kind of stuff. I mean, so you didn't have to win a majority of delegates to get all the delegates anymore. You could win now with a plurality, which, by the way, Donald Trump never did get a majority. Never once got a majority in the primaries. Never once got a majority in any of the elections. This last one, it looks like maybe he did, but some data has come out that it was like 49.5. So he didn't have the majority then either. So and for that matter, it was a plurality for Bush in his first term. He did get a majority in his reelection, but so I saw it then, and in fact, I wrote an article. It's like, vote for me. I'm like Donald Trump, except I believe in the Constitution. That kind of thing. So that's kind of when I made the cut, and you can go back in the archives on my website, going back to 2015, 2016. You'll see I wasn't alone, but I issued warnings of things that we're now seeing. You know, the assault on the Bill of Rights. I mentioned that in 2015, 2016. The capitulation by major evangelicals to whatever he wants, whatever it's what he gets. I wrote about that in 2015. I mean, I saw all that coming, and I'm not trying to say I'm some clairvoyant or anything like that, but it was just like I could read the tea leaves. You know, that was the thing. I mean, it's like it was obvious what was coming down the pike, and unfortunately, having established themselves as vacillating cowards, Mitch McConnell and John Boehner, once that 2015 election came down the pike, it was like all this is just going to be more of the same, and now it's going to be worse because the guy in the White House has an R after his name now instead of a D. So and boy, I mean, if you want any proof of that now, just look at how they bend over backwards on the trade war and tariffs and all that kind of stuff. But so there's
Right.
that. So your second question was what again?
Oh yeah, no, that was. Do you see it ever going in the other
Oh,
direction?
do I
To
see a return?
right,
Quite honestly, and I'm not trying to sound like a pessimist, but quite honestly, I don't. Um, uh, we have a new generation of Republicans coming up the line, and this new generation of Republicans have looked at some of the old generation of Republicans, and they've kind of taken some of the parts that they like. But I mean, like I've done stories recently where there've been polling on things like, and again, I'm focusing a lot now on liberty issues in particular, but there's polling going on now that Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, millennials, all these people that followed the baby boomers, they're in certain demographics, there's a majority of people who are okay with bigger government. They're okay with breaking the rules. There are major talking heads right now. I could list a couple of names, and your listeners would know who I'm talking about. But there are people who are now just openly advocating, have posted information online on their websites, and have done so on their talk shows. That's like, if maybe we need to go ahead and suspend freedom of the press until we get rid of all these bad eggs. And coincidentally, all the bad eggs just happen to be people who like the Democrat Party or the Republican Party. So I mean that. But I don't see it, which is why in my book I say that we have to change the game. In my opinion, uh, Republicans and Democrats are a duopoly. They work together. They carry the same convictions. They maybe differ on methodology, but they don't differ on the end result. And so what we have is a two-party system created by the two parties, run by the two parties for the benefit of the two parties. And there's no other way to look at this anymore. Um, you know, I get into it with, he never responds back to me, but I get into it with Senator Mike Lee a lot on Twitter because he's always, whatever Trump's most recent talking point is, he'll send a tweet out with a hypothetical question about it. And I'll, like for example, a couple of days ago, he talked about the evils of expensive healthcare, and I said, why didn't you and your Republican buddies, when you had the keys to the kingdom, it was Republican Congress, Republican presidency, why didn't you repeal Obamacare like you told the voters you were going to do at the time? Why didn't you even at least try to repeal Obamacare? And now, whether it should be repealed or not is a debatable topic. But my point was just that it's like, you're just spewing political talking points, trying to protect your party. And it's party over principle anymore in the Republican Party. It is in the Democrat Party too, which is what I'm saying. Uh, I often get criticized by some of my readers. It's like, how come you never talk about the AOC or Joe Biden or Kamala Harris this way? And it's like, well, actually, while Biden was in office, I wrote a lot about the things that he was doing wrong. But then I was also usually able to tie in Donald Trump in some way or form or fashion. For example, like Biden was kept a lot of Trump's tariffs in place when he first became president. It's like, well, the economic hassle that Biden was handed came from Donald Trump. It was Donald Trump who started the trade war. It was Donald Trump who did all the stuff during COVID. Operation Warp Speed and all that kind of stuff. So it was Donald Trump who was behind shutdowns and mandates, and so it's like you can blame Biden because the fruit of that seed was realized when he was in office, but the seed was planted by Donald Trump. But then vice versa, Biden planted seeds that Trump's now taking advantage of. That's what I'm saying. So it's a never-ending game. So that was a really long answer to your question, I'm afraid. But basically, it is just a fact that there's essentially no difference when you look at the bottom line. There's no difference between Republicans and Democrats, and for that reason, I don't think Republicans, whoever, I think the age of Reagan Republicans is gone.
Yeah, no, that's depressing. I kind of I was a kid when Reagan was in power, but I do consider myself a Reagan conservative. So yeah, and I think you're probably right. Unfortunately, I think that every now and then I see some glimmer of hope, out of a Republican leader. Bacon is saying some good things. Rand Paul is saying, I have lots of differences with Rand Paul, but on trade, he's got it right. I'm glad he's trying to do something. But I did want to ask you about the trade war, actually, David.
Oh, okay.
Obviously, a lot went on this week. We're recording this on Thursday, but yeah, a lot happened. A lot of global pain and chaos was caused. And then Trump did his latest tariff suspension, although there's still a lot of really bad tariffs in place, but this latest thing is supposed to last for 90 days rather than the standard 30, which is funny that that I'm even thinking about a standard 30 because we were doing that before. He would declare these and then well we'll suspend these tariffs and then we'll revisit in 30 days and all. It's just a big
Right,
mess. But
right.
do you think there's any chance? And I'm guessing based on your previous answer that you're going to tell me no, but do you see any chance of the Congress taking back the president's emergency tariff power? If they did, they could do this tomorrow and put an end to a lot of this idiocy. But I hope they do. You see some people that are talking about it, that are working on it, but not many. Any chance it's going to happen between now and this 90-day expiration date?
Well, based on the personalities involved, with the Republican personalities involved, I don't see it likely happening. Um, Ted Cruz is another Republican who is mentioned. It's like we've got to do something to reverse this tariff thing. It's just not good. It's not good, and it's like this. Well, Ted Cruz is also the one who warned us that Donald Trump was a egomaniac and a liar and all this kind of stuff, and that he would betray us one day. And then as soon as it was all decided, he decided, yeah, well, even though you accuse my father of being guilty of the assassination of JFK, and even though he's called my wife an ugly woman, no, I'm good with that. It's more important, et cetera. So I I would like to think so. You mentioned Rand Paul. I like Rand Paul generally speaking when he's into his libertarian leanings. Um, Paul, though, unfortunately has a history. On my website, I have a page called the GOP Hall of Shame, and GOP stands for Gutless on Principles. And Rand Paul has been enshrined. It was several years ago, but he was enshrined. So I just Rand Paul kind of has a history of coming out strong for something when the outcome's already decided against him. That's kind of my initial inkling. I mean, do I support what he's saying? Abso-freaking-lutely. I would love to see Congress take back their power. And every time I see something on Twitter from some member of Congress, well, we got to do this about tariffs. And it's like, hey, guess what? Read I think it's Article 1. Read the article in the Constitution that says that it's Congress who has the power to do this. Why don't you just do your job and take back the power that previous Congresses obviously have surrendered to the executive branch and do your job? I mean, just all you got to do is say, hey, look here, it's in the Constitution. Just follow the freaking Constitution and half of these problems would go away. But unfortunately, the Constitution is secondary to political preservation. And so um, Man, all your listeners are going to think, who's this Debbie Downer that he brought on
Oh, they're
today?
used to it they're used to it for me, David. So
So, but it's like I just I don't think they'll have any success, even if it were to pass. Like for example, they did have enough. They did have the numbers. There were 7 Republicans, I think, at last count, who were going to vote with the Democrats to try to take that back. Okay, so that's 7 and 40. How many they have? 48. So that's 55. Well, Trump will veto it, obviously, and so you don't have it's not a veto proof passage of the legislation. And Mike Johnson is such a coward in the House that it's just there's no he wouldn't even probably allow it to come up to a vote. I mean they'd have to probably do some kind of procedural rule manipulation just to even get a vote in Congress about it. But there's no way. I would love for it to happen. It's what the Constitution says should happen, but I have little hope that it will.
no, I think again, unfortunately, I think you're probably right. It's just odd to me that with all the economic turmoil we're seeing from these from what Trump's doing, that I don't think the GOP Congress has factored in. He has realized that this is just going to get worse for public opinion. I think more and more people are going to see this completely unnecessary chaos that's being caused with the economy is a bad thing. And they're worried about pleasing Trump because they're afraid that Trump's going to get his followers to turn on them, to primary them. But I'm just like, at some point, there's got to be a shift hard enough where it seems like it's got to be a gamble to actually side with preserving the economy without letting it go to ruin. But I don't
Absolutely.
know. Political.
Well, and what I find incredibly ironic is I've written articles every election. Every election when Trump was in office, except for the first one. Obviously, there were coattails in the first one, but the midterms in 2018, the 2020 election, uh, and now so far in the special elections that have taken place in his reelection, um, these Republicans who are scared to death to do anything against him, and so he endorses them. And despite his endorsements, Democrats are winning. There was a big red district in Pennsylvania I think it was last week, that was I mean, it was solidly red. I think Trump won it by like 18 percentage points, and it flipped. And then you've also got the situation, with Musk trying to buy that that Supreme Court justice position it was in Michigan, right? Michigan,
Michigan, yes.
Michigan, yeah. And that fell apart. I mean, he spent uh, tens of millions of dollars of his own money to try to buy this election for Trump's candidate, and it didn't work. Now, Michigan is not a red state. I understand that, but I'm just saying though that it's like, you know, I this is just one of the things that makes this even more perplexing to me. I mean, it's like what you mentioned is true. Obviously, you would think that they would want to protect the economy if they can, because that would be in their best interest. Hey, if you want to get reelected, make sure your constituents aren't living in a depression. That would be really really good. But instead, it's more like, well, Trump's going to have me primaried, so I can't do it, and so now I can run on his endorsement, and his endorsement isn't worth it's not worth much.
No,
So it is perplexing. It's very frustrating, but that's why we got to change the game. Like I say in the book, we got to, and that you got to do it locally. I mean, you can't change Washington overnight. Start locally. Run for your school board, run for your city council, run as a commissioner. Do things locally, because all your state politicians started locally, and then all your federal politicians usually start at the state level. There's a few exceptions to the rule. People with millions of dollars buy their elections sometimes, but generally speaking, people who go to Washington did a little bit of what they want to do in Washington at the state level first. So if you can do something to fix the things at the local and state level, start there, then we maybe have a chance. Again, like we were talking earlier about the next generation. Maybe by the time the next generation is in control, they'll have a fighting chance of trying to get back their freedom.
I think there's some wisdom to that. So much in today's politics, because of the media, everything's very fast moving, and so I think we look for all these immediate gratification type solutions. And I think you're right. We that probably isn't emphasized enough. What you're saying is that you really have to look at the long game if you're gonna create change. I mean,
Right.
Donald Trump was sort of a unique force that big pop culture celebrity, Hollywood, always in front of the cameras. So he was a little different. He came onto the scene, but really for substantive change, I think there it really does have to. I think you're right. It probably has to start very local. You got to be patient with it, I guess, but be persistent with it. But no, I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense.
Thank you.
Absolutely,
Okay,
absolutely.
like I said, I'm always right.
You know what? You put that in your moniker, so I should have thought about that. But
By the
well,
way,
Dan,
that's an intentional play on words. I'm always
exactly.
right to the
Yeah,
center.
no, it was
I'm right of center, and then I'm also always right because I'm never wrong.
very
So,
clever. And I thought it was interesting when you talked about yourself being in the wilderness. You literally do live in the wilderness.
I do live in the wilderness. Yes, I do.
Wise. So yeah, no, I won't divulge your exact location or anything, but Colorado mountains are. I love being there. I live a little bit on the Front Range over here in Greeley, but I am close to the mountains. I drive 30 minutes and I'm in the mountains. So
Yeah.
yeah, no, I love it. I'm sort of jealous that your main house is there. So that's great. But David, I want to thank you for coming on the podcast. It was great talking to you. Again, your book is The New Axis of Evil. I'm going to put some links to it in the show notes and also to the Strident Conservative to your website, stridentconservative.com. But this was a pleasure talking. I'm glad we've had a little bit of internet correspondence over the years. I'm honored that I was in your book. I didn't that I am in your book. I didn't realize that. But thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for having me on. It's funny, I kind of tweaked your ear a little bit about maybe having me on to talk about my book, and then it's like you were very gracious, like, oh yeah, sure, I'd love to. It's like there's. In fact, I said this probably a violation of protocol, and you said there's no protocol. Come on. So,
Yeah, the Daily Express is pretty informal. It's not just politics. I talk to people locally. I talk to people, entertainers, artists, authors. I love just talking to people. It's just something I did for fun. I mentioned before that I was initially setting up a podcast for Bernie and I, which does exist. But this was created just sort of by accident, where I created the stub. I gave it a name. Oh, let's see where this goes, and I just have fun with it. It's not like
I guess you couldn't use the Daily Show because that was kind of too close to the other one, right?
Oh yeah, the good thing there's a lot of play off of words. My newsletter is the Daily Grind. I have the Daily Weekly is my weekly Q&A on Bernie's website. So that's good. You can do a lot of play off words, and I haven't even. There's many more I could do, maybe for a clothing line down the road or something. I could go in that. I could do whatever. So yeah, but
Sure,
no.
sure.
Great. I hope people check out your website. I hope people check out your book, and I hope you come back sometime, David. I'd love to talk to you again.
I would love the opportunity. It was a pleasure, and thank you for having me on.
Thank you.